Hello. Today I wanted to talk about a really great band I think a lot of people would know about, but maybe only know passingly. It's Kinks. So you want to get into the Kinks. I should probably repeat the title of the video. So in this video, I'll be talking about five sort of hits that a lot of people would know if they know about classic rock or the Kinks themselves. But I'll give you a few deep cuts just as well, and a couple albums to get an album to get you started that most people might know, and then one that maybe not as many people would know. So as far as the Kinks as a whole, they have a very uniquely English sound to them, and I don't know if the sound necessarily is uniquely English, but they kind of went in their own direction mostly because they were forced to. They had a lot of trouble getting into America. I think one of them had made a joke to a border guard, and they actually got their visa rejected, and so they were forced to develop their own sound in England, which means they weren't as exposed to America in the way the Rolling Stones and the Beatles were. Um, so they were forced to look inward and look for inspiration in England, maybe a little bit abroad, but not as much as other bands did. So you start seeing that in the music, where if you haven't exposed haven't been exposed to England uh, deeply, especially in like the 1960s version of England. Things are a lot different now. Um, there are things that you might not get. I mean, I lived there for a couple of years, and there's still things that I don't completely understand. So anyway, I'll just go ahead and jump into it, and some of the this talk will actually be repeated or developed as we go on. So as far as five hits are concerned, now these aren't like anything to live and die by, but it's just sort of the formula I came up with just to kind of limit myself of so I don't go on for hours about a great band like the Kinks. So five songs that you probably should know starting off, and then we'll develop it later. So one of the songs I love is called Sunny Afternoon. It's about this rich guy who lives in a stately home. A stately home is a big house with a huge amount of property on it. A lot of these places are now owned by the NHS because they cost, or not the NHS, sorry, National Trust or the English Heritage, but probably mostly the National Trust. And so basically these properties were passed on from generation to generation. The problem is they're incredibly expensive to run. Um, they're old buildings built in the 1700s, 16, 17, 1800s. Um, a lot of these houses were built by plantation owners who went to the New World, built like a sugar plantation, say in Jamaica, brought all the money back, and bought themselves a giant piece of property and a really nice house on top of it. And incredibly expensive just to own and maintain the ground, let alone the building itself, heat it, have all these people paid for, to work there. And you'll see this a lot. And if you study like English social history, is that like a lot of these people just sort of poorer and poorer and poorer because they tried to maintain the property. You'll see this, a lot of this in a show called Downton Abbey, where it's incredibly expensive to run it, but they're very old school and they don't want to get rid of their property yet. They can't afford to run their property yet. The Lord is just totally committed to this, and it's going to cost them dearly. So anyway, this guy basically he's out of money. Taxman's taking a lot. In the 1960s, they had a very, very, very progressive tax system. You'll see in a song called "Taxman" by the Beatles, where he says, if like there's one for you, 19 for me. At some levels of taxation, we're taxing these people at 95%, which is insane. Um, if you earned over that, the amount over maybe like 50 or 20, the 20,000 pounds back in the 60s was still a lot of money. Basically didn't get that money at all. I mean, so basically they were just giant thieves. And so this guy basically has nothing left, and all he decides is he's just going to sit around and drink beer because his wife left him or his girlfriend left him. Um, and he's got nothing left, so he's just like, oh, screw it. I'm just going to enjoy this sunny afternoon. And it's a really fun song. There's a chromatic drop in it, and that's just sort of repeated over and over again. It really sticks in your head, and I really think it's interesting in a time when you think about a lot of the songs in the mid '60s, where "I Love You," or you're even getting into the era of like, oh, peace and love and stuff like that. And he's just basically like, I got nothing left. I'm just gonna have a beer and put my feet up and screw it. Very defeatist attitude, but at least you're making the most of a crappy situation. Next song, I won't go too much into it because I think it's talked about too much. If you're trying to get into the Kinks, it's a sine qua non. You have to get it. You have to know this song in order to even talk about rock and roll in general. But You Really Got Me, and I was kind of going between You Really Got Me and All Day and All the Night. There's a very similar vibe to them. Is that it's very distorted guitar. Even for today's standard, it's actually fairly distorted. I've heard stories that they were using a damaged amplifier or damaged speaker that distorted the guitar. So they didn't have the technology to distort it. They just had a damaged amplifier that came out with this sound. And both of the sounds, they're also using things called they're either called power chords or bar chords. And basically, rather than open chords where it rings, is just very muted by your hand. But allows you, it has a deeper, richer sound to it. And the Kinks really developed that. And one of the first bands to use bar chords as a rule, which later became big in heavy metal, in punk, and in like alternative grunge style music in the 90s. And so these songs, fast paced, they're punchy guitars, are really great. Next song is a very English song. I was talking about them being a typically English song, or English songwriters and musicians. And this song is called Waterloo Sunset from an album called Something Else. This was in 1967. And Waterloo Sunset is basically at Waterloo Station, which is on the south bank of the Thames River. And uh, it's a large underground station, a tube station, the London Underground. And if you look west around Sunset, you can see Sunset set over Parliament. Now, unfortunately, today, there's the big Millennial Wheel or the London Eye that kind of clouds that or blocks it. But if you look at it just right, you can see the sunset over Parliament. It's a really nice view. And the song itself is about, I think, is very typically English, since you're like, I don't need no friends as long as I have Waterloo Sunset. I will be fine. And it's a sort of, I won't say that all English people are like this, because that's not true. English people can be much more gregarious than anybody else, or as gregarious as anyone else. But I think only English people can be like this. It's sort of just resigned wistfulness in a sense of, yeah, they can be very strange people. And I think that's something that's, I don't know if it's actively encouraged in England, but it's not discouraged. And so you might see more people who are a bit weirder. And it's kind of fun. I'll be honest with you, English people can be very strange in a fun way. They can also be strange in a strange way. But you see a lot of eccentricity in this. But I think there's an element of a Pink Floyd song that I mentioned in the last video called Time that said, hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. And this has elements of this. And this was written maybe 5 or 6 years before Time was. And it has a very sort of similar feel, at least of that lyric in Time, really sums up this whole song. So check that one out. Next song, if you've turned on classic rock, you've heard this. It's a very, very catchy song called Lola. And basically, I think the story was that they were out, the band was out in Paris, maybe, and out in a nightclub or something like that. And one of them, or either the band or someone who's in the band's sort of entourage, like a guitar tech, met a transsexual, a transvestite, and looked the part but had a really deep voice, and he says, "Well, the hell with it, I'll just have some fun." And it's an extremely catchy song. There's also another song on the same album, Lola versus Power Man and the Money Go Round, um, called 8 Man, which has a very, very, very similar vibe. Obviously, if you're coming out in this, if these songs come out in the same album, there's probably going to be a similar theme going on in the album. Um, and it's very singable. You'll recognize it if you've listened to any classic rock. The fifth one I'm going to include, like I say, these hits, they're not. This is not like the end all be all. It's a great place to start. Really, you're going to like what you're going to like, but this is a good place to start, even just to be able to talk about the band. It's a song called Victoria, from the album Arthur, or the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, the British Empire. Obviously, a take from Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Um, so uh, Victoria is a very sort of, it's, on the surface, is very patriotic, talking about Victoria, Queen Victoria, basically the monarch for almost all of the 19th century, and really at the height of the British Empire. Um, and it seems very patriotic. If you listen to the lyrics, it's sort of like maybe there was a bit of a hollow element to this British Empire, that, as rich as they were, as expanded across the globe as the British Empire was, they really did not. Um, not everybody saw that wealth, and but patriotism kind of fed the desire for this politically, from the little people, the working class. Um, so I mean, those are good places to start. I'll just jump into the deep cuts to keep this as short as possible. The deep cuts, from the same album was Lola, called Lola versus Power Man and the Money Go Round. This song's called Power Man, and the guitar part in it is amazing. The lyrics are very, only Ray Davis could have written this song, and only somebody who had been screwed over in the music business could have written this song. It's a song really about the basically, I would say, just a music executive taking everything and leaving the person who created the music penniless. The guitar is just, I love it. That it's a great guitar part. Um, and it's just like it's something I when I can't just listen to it once. I have to listen to it at least like 3 or 4 times just to kind of relive it. It's an incredible song, and I recommend this. It doesn't get a lot of play, but it definitely deserves it. Um, the next song is actually not on any album. It's a B-side, and three of these deep cuts are actually B-sides. So, when you bought a single, it'd be the A side, like a big song like You Really Got Me. On the other side, I mean, you wouldn't just give, there had to be another side to it. I mean, you might as well slap another song on there. And the Kinks put out some really great music on the B side. It just never made it onto an album. If it did, it made it onto a compilation or like a US or Australian version of another album or something like that. But this song, Days, is a song that just kind of breaks my heart, because I think that if you're old enough, you've been through uh, a breakup or two, and Days is just, it's a very mature breakup song in the sense of it's a take that most young people just wouldn't ever have. And I think he was probably only in his early to mid 20s when he wrote this, and you just think, geez, I was such a child when it comes to its attitude. It's basically like, thank you for the days. There's one, I forget the lyrics exactly. There's sacred days, and it could be applied to many things. But you think like he's just glad that the relationship happened, even if it had to end. And the song just is really mellow. It's wistful. It's very Ray Davis, very Kinks. It's not a rock and roll song, but I think it's a really good song. The next one I think is a very mod song. It's called "Sitting on My Sofa," another B-side, that really did not see a lot of action chart wars, but it's a very mod song. So if you don't know about mods, I'd go read up on it. It's pretty much summed up by the movie uh, Quadrophenia by the Who. Just look at the dress. It was very sort of, I wouldn't even know. I'm the worst person in the world as far as trying to describe fashion. Obviously, I'm no slave to fashion. Um, I just love the sort of the hammer-ons and the trills, and it's really just a peppy song. Lyrics are nonsense, but it's just a fun song. It has a lot of false endings. You think it's going to end? Nope, it's going to continue, and it's actually not that long. Um, I think they're B-sides. I mean, I really took me a while just to cut it down to these songs. There's another one that's very similar that I just think, oh God. I guess I'll just include it on here. It's called um, uh, I'm Not Like Everyone Else, and I actually put it on here, a live version of this. The live version versus the B-side version is totally different. This was the live version was done in like the really the mid '90s, right when they stopped making music. They never officially broke up, but they haven't done anything since the mid '90s. Um, and it has a very Pink Floyd feel to it without the synthesizers. It's called "I'm Not Like Everyone Else," and I think it was actually used in an episode of the uh, The Sopranos, which is a weird combination, but whatever. And it's just one of those. It's just a song like I think everybody's felt like I'm not like everyone else. And he talks about I can't have a job like everyone else. I'm not built like everyone else, and just like I'll do anything you want me to. But there's something I'll ask you for you never to do is just like I'm not. Just appreciate that I'm not like everyone else. I'm not. I'm my own man, and um, we'll just leave it at that. It's a really good song. The guitar works on it. It's really good. And the last one I'm going to talk about is Yo Yo um, by on the album Give the People What They Want. His last really good album of theirs is done in 1981. This is like 15, 16 years after their big break. Um, and it's a really sad song because it's about a guy who I love the opening line where he basically comes home and he's shattered after work and he's like he puts on channel 4 but his brain is not expected for an hour at home. Who hasn't been there? Puts on the TV and just zones out for an hour because he's just so mentally exhausted from work. And his wife realizes that's not the man I married. Uh, and you think about we started off as so young in love, very energetic, and then suddenly it all falls apart, or it's warped into this sort of nothingness, and it's kind of sad. But who hasn't been there, So it takes a little bit extra energy to keep that going. So anyway, those are the songs I think you should focus on if you want to like album recommendations. I would start with Arthur. Arthur is going to be very very British Empire oriented. I think the story was is that Ray Davis had a brother-in-law who's a bit older than him, and it was just like this is the most English man alive. He's very just so in love with Britain. And I've met people like that. They're the salt of the earth. They love the Queen, love the royal family. They're always out there celebrating on the Queen's birthday or any sort of special holidays. Sometimes they have a bank holiday weekend where they just go out and wave flags. It's not as over the top as it is here, but it's just something very sweet and patriotic I really appreciate about the English, particularly the English, because the other places aren't as pro-British and pro-monarchy as the English can be. Um, and it is biting in a sense that it's critiquing that. But there's a pleasantness about British patriotism. Even if, like all countries, we all have, every country in the world has its ups and downs. And Britain, if you've spent any decent amount of time there, it's a very pleasant place. Um, uh, and I think this album kind of sums it up. It's really fun. I think you'd probably like it. If you don't like it, then you're probably not into the King. It's kind of like a litmus test. The second one I'll give you, the lesser known, is "Give the People What They Want." It's a total change of pace from Arthur, any of the albums around there. In the middle, I would say like the '70s is very rock opera. There is a live version of Everybody Wants to Be in Showbiz or soap opera. It's really good, but the album, the recorded album in the studio, is not as good. The live version is really good. Um, but I would say give the people what they want, and if you want another one, I would do Power Man, like Lola versus Power Man and the Money Go Round. It's not quite as good as Give the People What They Want or Arthur, but it's still really good. There's so many great albums. I think they've done nearly 30 albums over the years. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. There's at least one or two songs on every album that's good. Um, I would stay clear of the Preservation Act. I don't get it. It's just if it's any good, it's over my head. It's just kind of annoying and a little bit too much for me. A little too Kinks for me. But it's a good place to start. So if you want to get into the Kinks, there you are. I'll see you soon. Hello.